Hello there, and welcome to this quiet corner of YouTube, where curiosity meets contemplation, and the deepest questions about our world unfold at the gentle pace of evening thought. Tonight, we're stepping into a realm that exists somewhere between archaeology and imagination, between the solid ground of scientific evidence and the vast, unexplored territories of what might have been. Here's something that might make you pause. Right now, beneath your feet, there are layers of Earth that have witnessed more history than all of human memory combined. And in those layers, scattered across continents and hidden beneath rising seas, lie hints of something extraordinary, something that challenges everything we think we know about who came first. Picture this. What if the story of human civilization isn't the neat, linear progression we learned in school? What if, instead of being the first to build cities, develop technology, and reach for the stars, we're actually the latest chapter in a much older book? What if we're not Earth's first civilization at all, but perhaps its second, third, or even 10th attempt at conscious technological life? Tonight we're going to explore this possibility together. Not with wild theories or unfounded speculation, but by walking quietly through the growing body of evidence that suggests our planet may have hosted advanced societies long before the first pyramid was built, long before the first written word was carved in stone. We'll examine underwater cities that predate known history, megalithic structures that seem to defy the technological capabilities of their supposed builders, and artifacts so out of place in time that they've earned their own scientific classification. This isn't about proving anything definitively. Science doesn't work that way, and neither do the best questions. Instead, this is about opening our minds to possibilities, about sitting with uncertainty, and about recognizing that the more we learn about our planet's past, the more mysterious it becomes. It's about understanding that Earth keeps its secrets well, and that time, that great eraser, may have hidden civilizations so thoroughly that we're only now beginning to glimpse their shadows. So settle in, perhaps dim the lights and let your imagination expand to match the vastness of deep time itself. Because the story we're about to explore together isn't just about the past. It's about how we understand our place in the long, winding narrative of consciousness on this remarkable planet we call home. There's something profoundly humbling about standing at the edge of the ocean and realizing that beneath those waves lie landscapes that were once home to people just like us. Not mythical beings or legendary civilizations from stories, but real humans who built homes, raised families, and looked up at the same stars we see tonight, wondering about their place in the cosmos. The truth is, our planet is an expert at keeping secrets, and one of its greatest talents is making civilizations disappear so completely that their absence becomes invisible to us. This isn't speculation. This is the documented reality of what happens when ice ages end and sea levels rise by hundreds of feet. Around 8,000 to 6,000 years ago, vast plains stretched where the North Sea and Baltic Sea exist today. Now, these weren't barren wastelands. They were fertile, habitable lands that supported human communities for thousands of years. Archaeological evidence tells us that these submerged regions were once thriving ecosystems where our ancestors built settlements, developed cultures, and lived full, complex lives. But then the ice melted, the sea levels rose, and in what must have been one of the most gradual yet catastrophic events in human history, entire landscapes simply vanished beneath the waves. Not in a single dramatic flood, but over centuries, as communities were forced to retreat again and again, leaving behind everything they had built, everything that proved they had existed at all. This isn't ancient history in the way we usually think about it. This is recent enough that if civilizations had developed writing, technology, or monumental architecture during this period, we would expect to find evidence. Instead, we find mostly silence. The kind of silence that comes not from absence, but from erasure. And this pattern of erasure repeats throughout Earth's geological record. Every time the climate shifts dramatically, every time sea levels rise or fall, every time ice advances or retreats, the planet essentially resets the stage for civilization. What remains on the surface gets buried, weathered away, or submerged. What lies beneath gets compressed into rock or scattered by geological forces. Consider the implications of this for a moment. If you wanted to hide evidence of an advanced civilization, you couldn't design a better system than the one Earth already has in place. Continental drift slowly tears apart and rebuilds land masses over millions of years. Erosion wears down even the most solid structures. Volcanic activity buries entire regions under layers of ash and lava, and rising seas swallow coastlines where statistically most civilizations would choose to build their cities. The geological record shows us that Earth has experienced numerous periods of dramatic climate change throughout its history. Some of these changes happened gradually over millions of years. Others occurred with shocking rapidity. The Younger Dryas period, which began approximately 12,800 years ago, represents one of the most dramatic examples of rapid climate change in recent geological history. During the Younger Dryas, global temperatures plummeted suddenly and dramatically, plunging the world back into near-glacial conditions for more than 1,000 years. This wasn't a gradual cooling. It was an abrupt shift that occurred within decades, perhaps even years. The cause of this dramatic climate reversal has puzzled scientists for generations, but recent research has pointed toward a cosmic explanation that's both fascinating and terrifying. Evidence has been mounting for what's known as the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. This theory suggests that around 12,800 years ago, fragments from a disintegrating comet struck Earth, triggering massive wildfires, atmospheric loading with dust and smoke, and the sudden climate change that characterizes the Younger Dryas period. The evidence for this cosmic impact includes the discovery of impact markers such as nanodiamonds, platinum anomalies, and microscopic spherules of melted glass in geological layers that correspond precisely to the Younger Dryas boundary. These are the same types of markers found at other confirmed impact sites, including the Chicxulub crater that's associated with the extinction of the dinosaurs. But here's what makes the Younger Dryas event particularly relevant to our exploration tonight. It coincides with a mysterious population bottleneck in human history. Genetic evidence suggests that human populations dropped dramatically during this period, creating what researchers call a bottleneck that nearly ended our species. It took centuries for human populations to recover from whatever happened 12,800 years ago. Now imagine for a moment that advanced human civilizations had been developing during the thousands of years before this cosmic catastrophe. Imagine cities, technologies, accumulated knowledge, and cultural achievements that represented the pinnacle of human development at that time. A comet impact of the magnitude suggested by the Younger Dryas evidence wouldn't just change the climate. It would obliterate surface civilizations, scatter populations, and force the survivors to focus on basic survival rather than maintaining advanced technologies or knowledge systems. From the perspective of anyone living through such an event, it would literally be the end of the world as they knew it. And from our perspective, looking back across nearly 13,000 years of geological change, erosion, and sedimentation, any evidence of what came before would be incredibly difficult to detect. This is the context in which we must consider the possibility of lost civilizations. Not as a romantic notion or an adventure story, but as a serious question about what traces would remain if advanced human societies had developed and then been catastrophically destroyed at various points throughout our planet's history. The archaeological record, as complete as it might seem to us, represents only a tiny fraction of human history. Most of what humans have built, created, and accomplished throughout our time on Earth has left no permanent trace. Organic materials decay, metal objects corrode, stone structures erode, and given enough time, even the most monumental achievements can be reduced to indistinguishable rubble or dust, but occasionally, just occasionally, something survives, something that doesn't quite fit the timeline we've constructed for human development, something that makes us pause and wonder whether our understanding of the past might be incomplete. These are the anomalies that have begun to capture the attention of researchers around the world, not because they prove the existence of lost civilizations, but because they suggest that the story of human technological and cultural development might be far more complex than we've assumed. The ocean has always been humanity's greatest keeper of secrets. While we've mapped the surface of Mars with remarkable precision, more than 80% of our own planet's seafloor remains unexplored and unmapped. This vast underwater realm holds mysteries that could fundamentally change our understanding of human history, if only we had the technology and resources to fully investigate its depths. But even with our limited exploration of the underwater world, we've already begun to discover things that challenge conventional historical narratives, submerged structures that appear to show signs of human construction, underwater formations that seem too regular, too purposeful to be entirely natural, and in some cases, artifacts and architectural remains that suggest human habitation in areas that have been underwater for thousands of years. One of the most intriguing examples comes from the waters off the coast of Gujarat, India, where archaeologists have discovered what appears to be the remains of an ancient city. The site, known as Dwarka, has captured international attention not just because of its impressive underwater structures, but because of its potential connection to ancient Indian texts. The discovery was made in 2001 when marine archaeologists exploring the seafloor found walls, pillars, and pottery fragments lying 120 feet underwater. Carbon dating of organic materials found at the site suggests that some of these structures could be 7,500 years old or even older. The artifacts include stone anchors, which suggest that this was once a bustling port city, a hub of maritime trade and cultural exchange. What makes Dwarka particularly fascinating is its potential historical significance. Ancient Hindu texts, particularly the Mahabharata, describe a golden city ruled by Lord Krishna that was eventually lost to the sea. For centuries, scholars assumed these descriptions were purely mythological, elaborate fictional accounts with no basis in historical reality. But the underwater discoveries off Gujarat have prompted archaeologists to reconsider this assumption. The structural remains found beneath the waves include sophisticated urban planning features such as drainage systems and architectural elements that suggest advanced engineering capabilities. The precision of the construction and the complexity of the urban layout indicate a level of technological sophistication that predates many well-known ancient civilizations. The implications of Dwarka extend far beyond a single underwater site. If the city is indeed as old as the carbon dating suggests, it would represent evidence of advanced urban civilization in the Indian subcontinent thousands of years before the Indus Valley civilization, which is traditionally considered one of the world's earliest urban cultures. This discovery raises profound questions about the development of human civilization in South Asia and suggests that our understanding of ancient technological capabilities may be significantly incomplete. The sophisticated drainage systems and architectural features found at underwater Dwarka indicate knowledge of urban planning and engineering that we don't typically associate with civilizations from this early period. But Dwarka is not an isolated case. Underwater archaeological sites around the world are yielding evidence of human habitation in areas that have been submerged since the end of the last ice age. Off the coasts of Japan, Malta, and the eastern Mediterranean, divers and marine archaeologists have documented structures that appear to show evidence of human construction or modification. The Yonaguni Monument off the coast of Japan represents another compelling example of underwater structures that challenge conventional archaeological interpretations. Discovered in 1987 by a local diving instructor, the site features massive stone formations with what appear to be carved steps, terraces, and geometric shapes that seem too regular and purposeful to be entirely natural. The debate over Yonaguni continues among archaeologists and geologists. Some argue that the formations are entirely natural, created by geological processes and erosion patterns that can produce remarkably regular shapes in certain types of rock. Others contend that while the basic rock formation may be natural, it shows clear evidence of human modification and carving. What's particularly intriguing about Yonaguni is its age. The site has been underwater for approximately 10,000 years, which means that if it does show evidence of human modification, it would represent some of the oldest architectural work known to archaeology. The implications of such an early date for sophisticated stone carving and architectural planning would require a significant revision of our understanding of human technological development. These underwater discoveries are part of a larger pattern that's becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. As sea levels rose at the end of the last ice age, they submerged not just empty landscapes, but potentially thriving coastal civilizations that had developed over thousands of years of stable climate conditions. The statistical reality is that most human civilizations throughout history have chosen to build their major cities near coastlines or along rivers. These locations provide access to fresh water, maritime trade routes, and fertile agricultural land. But they also make civilizations vulnerable to rising sea levels and catastrophic flooding. If advanced civilizations did develop during the thousands of years before the end of the last ice age, we would expect to find their remains primarily in coastal areas that are now underwater. The fact that we're beginning to discover sophisticated structures in these submerged zones suggests that there may be much more to uncover as underwater archaeological techniques continue to improve. The challenge of underwater archaeology cannot be overstated. Unlike terrestrial archaeological sites, underwater locations are difficult to access, expensive to investigate, and subject to ongoing deterioration from marine environments. Salt water corrodes metals, marine organisms colonize and obscure structures, and ocean currents constantly redistribute sediments that can bury or expose archaeological features. Despite these challenges, advances in underwater exploration technology are opening new possibilities for investigating submerged archaeological sites. High-resolution sonar mapping, remotely operated vehicles, and advanced diving techniques are allowing researchers to document underwater structures with increasing precision and detail. But perhaps the most significant limitation in underwater archaeology is simply the vast scale of the areas that need to be investigated. The continental shelves that were exposed during the last ice age represent millions of square kilometers of potentially habitable land that is now underwater. Systematically exploring even a small fraction of this area would require resources and coordination on an unprecedented scale. This brings us to an unsettling realization. If advanced prehistoric civilizations did exist and were subsequently submerged by rising sea levels, the evidence for their existence might be scattered across the ocean floor in fragments so dispersed and degraded that we might never be able to piece together a complete picture of what was lost. And yet, even the fragmentary evidence we've discovered so far is enough to suggest that the conventional narrative of human civilization may be incomplete. The underwater structures at Dwarka, Yonaguni, and other sites around the world hint at a much more complex and ancient history of human technological and cultural development than we've previously recognized. As we continue our exploration tonight, we'll turn our attention from the depths of the ocean to some of the most mysterious and sophisticated ancient structures ever discovered on dry land. Structures that challenge our understanding of prehistoric human capabilities and suggest that the story of civilization may be far older and more complex than we've ever imagined. Next time, we'll journey to the rolling hills of southeastern Turkey, where an archaeological discovery so revolutionary that it's been called the 0 point of civilization, has forced scholars to completely reconsider everything they thought they knew about the dawn of human society. In the rolling hills of southeastern Turkey, beneath layers of dust and the passage of countless seasons, archaeologists uncovered something that would forever change how we think about the dawn of human civilization. The site is called Göbekli Tepe, and its discovery in 1994 sent shockwaves through the archaeological community that are still reverberating today. Imagine, if you will, standing among massive limestone pillars that tower 18 feet into the sky, each one weighing as much as 16 tons. These aren't rough-hewn stones hastily arranged by primitive peoples. They're precisely carved monuments decorated with intricate reliefs of lions, foxes, scorpions, and abstract symbols that seem to encode a cosmology we can barely begin to understand. Now imagine being told that these pillars were erected not a few thousand years ago, but nearly 12,000 years ago. That's 7 millennia before Stonehenge, 7 millennia before the pyramids of Giza, 7 millennia before anything we traditionally associate with advanced ancient architecture. The implications of this dating are staggering. According to everything we thought we knew about human development, 12,000 years ago, our ancestors were supposed to be nomadic hunter-gatherers, small bands of people following herds and seasons, living in temporary shelters, possessing nothing more sophisticated than stone tools and basic fire-making technology. They certainly weren't supposed to be capable of quarrying, transporting, and erecting massive stone monuments according to complex architectural plans. They weren't supposed to have the social organization necessary to coordinate hundreds or thousands of workers in a single construction project. And they definitely weren't supposed to possess the mathematical knowledge required to create geometric designs of stunning precision. Yet that's exactly what the evidence at Göbekli Tepe suggests they were doing. When researchers analysed the underlying architecture of the site using computer algorithms, they discovered something remarkable. The builders hadn't just arranged these massive stones randomly, they had created a geometric masterpiece. The two central pillars in each circular enclosure align exactly with the midpoint of the structures. When you draw imaginary lines connecting the centre points of 3 of the largest enclosures, they form a nearly perfect equilateral triangle. This level of precision requires not just mathematical knowledge, but the ability to execute complex architectural planning across multiple structures simultaneously. Think about what this means in practical terms. The builders of Göbekli Tepe had to survey the landscape, calculate distances and angles, and coordinate the construction of multiple circular structures according to an overarching geometric design. They had to quarry massive stones from distant locations, transport them across rough terrain without wheels or domesticated animals, and position them with millimeter precision. The logistics alone are mind-boggling. Each of those 16-ton pillars had to be extracted from bedrock using only stone tools, then somehow moved across miles of uneven ground to the construction site. The builders had to dig deep foundation pits in solid rock, erect the pillars upright, and fit them into complex architectural arrangements that have remained stable for nearly 12 millennia. This wasn't the work of a few individuals or even a small community. It required large, organised workforces operating under sophisticated management systems. It implied the existence of leadership structures, specialised roles, and resource distribution networks that could support non-productive workers during long construction periods. In other words, it suggested a level of social complexity that wasn't supposed to exist until thousands of years later, after the development of agriculture had created food surpluses and permanent settlements. But here's where the story becomes even more intriguing. Göbekli Tepe predates agriculture. The people who built this extraordinary complex were still hunter-gatherers, at least according to traditional definitions. They hadn't domesticated plants or animals. They hadn't developed pottery or metallurgy. By all conventional measures, they were living in the Stone Age. This discovery has forced archaeologists to completely reconsider the relationship between social complexity and technological development. For decades, the accepted narrative was beautifully simple. First, humans developed agriculture, then surplus food allowed for population growth and specialization. Then complex societies emerged with governments and religions, and finally these societies built monumental architecture. Göbekli Tepe suggests the exact opposite sequence. Here we have monumental religious architecture that seems to have preceded agriculture, possibly even driving its development rather than resulting from it. The site appears to have been a pilgrimage destination, a sacred center that drew people from across the region for ritual gatherings and ceremonies. The effort required to build and maintain such a center may have created the social and economic pressures that led to the development of agriculture. When large groups of people needed to be fed regularly at a central location, the incentive to domesticate plants and animals would have increased dramatically. If this interpretation is correct, then religion and ritual architecture weren't late developments in human civilization. They were among the earliest expressions of complex social organization, predating and possibly catalyzing the agricultural revolution that we've always considered the foundation of civilized life. The artistic sophistication of Göbekli Tepe is equally remarkable. The stone carvings aren't crude or primitive representations. They're detailed, naturalistic depictions of animals rendered with skill that wouldn't look out of place in much later artistic traditions. The abstract symbols carved into the pillars suggest a sophisticated symbolic language, possibly even early writing systems that predate known scripts by thousands of years. Some researchers have proposed that these symbols might represent astronomical observations, encoding knowledge about celestial cycles and seasonal changes. Others suggest they might be religious or mythological narratives, stories carved in stone that preserve cultural memories from humanity's deep past. What's particularly striking is that many of the animals depicted at Göbekli Tepe were dangerous predators, creatures that hunter-gatherer societies would normally avoid or fear. Lions, leopards, bears, venomous snakes, and scorpions dominate the artistic program. This suggests that the builders had a complex relationship with the natural world, one that went beyond simple survival to include sophisticated, spiritual, and mythological frameworks. The site also shows evidence of intentional burial. Around 8,000 years ago, the entire complex was deliberately covered with tons of earth and stone, preserving it like a time capsule until its rediscovery in the modern era. This wasn't abandonment or natural burial. It was a conscious decision to hide or protect the site, suggesting that even thousands of years after its construction, Göbekli Tepe retained special significance for the people of the region. Why would anyone go to such enormous effort to bury a site that had clearly required tremendous resources to build? What changed in human culture or society that made it necessary to hide this extraordinary achievement from future generations? These questions point to deeper mysteries about the development and decline of early complex societies. Göbekli Tepe wasn't the only sophisticated site from this period. Archaeologists have discovered numerous other Neolithic structures across Turkey and the broader region that show similar levels of architectural and artistic sophistication. This suggests that the builders of Göbekli Tepe weren't isolated innovators or anomalous exceptions to prehistoric development. They were part of a broader cultural tradition that possessed advanced knowledge and capabilities that we're only beginning to understand. And yet, this tradition seems to have disappeared. The sophisticated stoneworking techniques, the geometric planning knowledge, the artistic skills, and the social organization required to build these monuments all seem to have vanished from the archaeological record for thousands of years before re-emerging in later civilizations. What happened to this early tradition of monumental architecture? Did the knowledge simply fade away as social priorities shifted, Was it deliberately suppressed or hidden? Or did some catastrophic event disrupt the cultural continuity that might have preserved and developed these early achievements? The mystery deepens when we consider that Göbekli Tepe wasn't built during a period of climatic stability. The site was constructed during the Younger Dryas period, that dramatic episode of rapid climate change that we explored earlier. The builders were creating this extraordinary complex, even as the world around them was experiencing some of the most severe environmental stresses in recent geological history. This timing suggests a level of cultural resilience and determination that challenges many assumptions about how prehistoric peoples responded to environmental pressures. Rather than simply struggling to survive, the builders of Göbekli Tepe were investing enormous resources in projects that served spiritual and social rather than purely practical purposes. Perhaps most intriguingly, the construction of Göbekli Tepe spans the exact period when the Younger Dryas climate crisis was ending and giving way to the more stable Holocene climate that has characterized the last 11,000 years of human history. The site seems to mark a pivotal moment in human development, a transition point between the harsh conditions of the late Pleistocene and the environmental stability that would eventually support the rise of agriculture and civilization as we know it. As we continue our journey through the evidence for possible lost civilizations, we'll discover that Göbekli Tepe is not an isolated anomaly. Around the world, archaeologists are uncovering evidence of sophisticated prehistoric cultures that possessed capabilities far beyond what conventional timelines suggest should have been possible. These discoveries are forcing us to reconsider not just the timeline of human development, but the nature of knowledge itself. How is technological and cultural knowledge preserved across generations? How easily can it be lost, and what would happen if an advanced civilization were suddenly disrupted by catastrophic events? Sometimes the most profound questions arise from the smallest discoveries. A gear wheel where no gear wheel should exist. A battery in an ancient tomb. A map that shows coastlines hidden beneath ice for millennia. These are the artifacts that archaeologists call out of place, or OOPArts, objects that seem to possess a level of technological sophistication that doesn't match the time period in which they were supposedly created. Now, before we venture further into this territory, it's important to acknowledge that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Most artifacts that initially appear to be out of place eventually find conventional explanations through more careful analysis, better dating techniques, or the discovery of additional context that clarifies their origins. But some objects continue to resist easy categorization, and their very existence raises uncomfortable questions about our understanding of ancient technological capabilities. These aren't necessarily proof of lost civilizations, but they are reminders that the development of human knowledge may have been far more complex and discontinuous than we typically assume. Perhaps the most famous example is the Antikythera mechanism, a device discovered in a Roman-era shipwreck off the Greek island of Antikythera in 1901. For decades, the corroded bronze object sat in museums, recognized as ancient but not understood. It wasn't until the 1970s that researchers began to appreciate the true sophistication of what they were examining. The Antikythera mechanism is a mechanical computer built around 150 BCE, capable of calculating the positions of the sun, moon, and planets with a remarkable accuracy. It can predict eclipses, track the 4-year cycle of the Olympic Games, and model the complex orbital mechanics of celestial bodies using a system of at least 37 bronze gear wheels. The mathematical and engineering knowledge required to design and build such a device is extraordinary. The mechanism incorporates differential gears and complex mechanical systems that weren't seen again in human technology until the astronomical clocks of medieval Europe, more than 1,000 years later. As mathematician Tony Freeth observed, if the Antikythera mechanism hadn't been discovered, no one would believe that such sophisticated computational technology could have existed in ancient Greece. The device represents a level of mechanical engineering that seems completely out of step with everything else we know about Hellenistic technology. What makes this particularly puzzling is the apparent isolation of the achievement. We have no other examples of similar devices from the ancient world. No technical manuals describing how to build such mechanisms. No clear technological lineage leading up to this level of sophistication or continuing from it. This raises the possibility that the Antikythera mechanism represents knowledge from a technological tradition that was much more advanced than we recognize, but whose other achievements have been lost to time. Perhaps ancient Greek civilization had access to scientific and engineering knowledge that far exceeded what survived in written records or archaeological remains. The isolation of extraordinary technological achievements appears to be a recurring pattern in the archaeological record. The Damascus steel produced by medieval Islamic smiths possessed metallurgical properties that weren't understood or replicated until the development of modern materials science. The concrete used by Roman engineers was more durable than many modern formulations, yet the knowledge of how to produce it was lost during the fall of the empire. Even more intriguing are the metallurgical achievements that seem to exceed the supposed capabilities of their time periods. The Delhi iron pillar in India is at least 1500 years old, possibly older, yet it shows no signs of rust despite exposure to the elements for over a millennium. The pillar is 99.72% pure iron, with a level of refinement that matches the best modern wrought iron, while lacking the impurities that characterize even high-quality contemporary metallurgy. The technical requirements for producing such pure iron should not have been available to ancient smiths. The temperatures required to refine iron to this degree of purity, and the techniques needed to prevent oxidation during the forging process, represent metallurgical knowledge that seems anachronistic for its time period. Similar questions arise from the Ulfbert swords of the Viking era, dating from 800 to 1000 CE. These weapons were made from steel with a carbon content 3 times higher than other swords of their period, with impurities removed to a degree that required heating iron ore to at least 3000 degrees Fahrenheit. The technical knowledge and equipment necessary to achieve such temperatures and maintain the precise chemical control required for this quality of steel shouldn't have been available until the Industrial Revolution. Yet dozens of these superior weapons have been found across Viking territories, suggesting not just isolated examples of exceptional craftsmanship, but an entire technological tradition that possessed metallurgical capabilities far beyond what conventional historical models would predict. These examples point to a broader pattern in the archaeological record: the existence of technological knowledge that appears and disappears throughout history in ways that suggest complex, discontinuous patterns of development and loss. Rather than steady linear progress, human technological capability seems to follow a more erratic path, with periods of remarkable achievement followed by apparent setbacks or disappearances of knowledge. This pattern becomes even more pronounced when we examine the precision, stoneworking capabilities demonstrated at various ancient sites around the world. The megalithic structures at Sacsayhuaman in Peru showcase masonry techniques that challenge our understanding of pre-Columbian technology. The massive stones, some weighing over 150 tons, are cut and fitted together with such precision that not even a sheet of paper can be inserted between them. The degree of accuracy required to achieve this level of fit between irregular, multi-ton stone blocks suggests construction techniques and tools that were far more sophisticated than the bronze and stone implements typically associated with pre-Columbian civilizations. The stones show evidence of precise cutting, possibly with techniques that could achieve tolerances measured in fractions of millimeters. At Baalbek in Lebanon, the foundation of the ancient temple complex includes stone blocks weighing over 1,000 tons each. A rejected stone left at the nearby quarry weighs an estimated 1,150 tons. The logistics of quarrying, transporting, and precisely positioning such massive stones would challenge even modern construction equipment with hydraulic systems and steel cables. How did ancient builders achieve such precision in working with stones of impossible weight? What tools and techniques allowed them to cut, move, and position these megalithic blocks with accuracy that rivals modern engineering capabilities? The conventional archaeological explanation is that these achievements represent the peak capabilities of their respective civilizations, accomplished through combinations of human labor, ingenious mechanical systems, and techniques that have since been lost. This explanation accounts for the observed evidence while remaining within the boundaries of known historical development. But the pattern of isolated technological achievements raises deeper questions about the nature of knowledge preservation and transmission. If these capabilities existed in ancient civilizations, why don't we find more evidence of the technological traditions that must have supported them? Why do these achievements appear as isolated peaks rather than as part of continuous developmental sequences? One possibility is that much of ancient technological knowledge was preserved through apprenticeship systems and oral traditions that could be disrupted by social upheaval, conquest, or demographic collapse. Master craftsmen might possess sophisticated techniques that died with them if they were unable to pass their knowledge to the next generation. Another possibility is that some of these achievements represent the rediscovery of knowledge that had been lost and found multiple times throughout human history. Perhaps the development of human technological capability has been far more cyclical than we assume, with periods of advancement followed by setbacks that required later civilizations to reinvent techniques that had existed before. This cyclical model of technological development would help explain why we occasionally find artifacts or achievements that seem anachronistic for their time periods. They might not represent impossible anomalies, but rather evidence of technological knowledge that had existed, been lost, and was being rediscovered. As we delve deeper into these mysteries, we begin to see patterns that suggest human technological and cultural development may be far more complex than the linear progression we typically imagine. The evidence points toward a story of rise and fall, discovery and loss, achievement and forgetting that repeats across different time periods and civilizations. Next, we'll explore how the very forces that shape our planet work constantly to erase the traces of human achievement, and why the absence of evidence might not be evidence of absence when it comes to understanding our deep past. There's something almost poetic about the way Earth erases its own history. Not maliciously, not with intent, but with the same patient persistence that shapes mountains and carves canyons. Time, it turns out, is perhaps the most effective destroyer of evidence that has ever existed. And understanding this process of planetary forgetting might be the key to appreciating just how much we might never know about our own past. Consider for a moment the simple act of weathering. Rain falls on stone, and over millions of years, the mightiest monuments crumble into dust. Wind carries that dust across continents, depositing it in layers that become sediment, then rock, then the foundation for new landscapes entirely. What was once a carved statue becomes indistinguishable from the natural geology around it. This isn't speculation. We can observe this process happening in real time at archaeological sites around the world. The Sphinx in Egypt, carved from relatively soft limestone, has lost much of its original detail to wind erosion in just a few thousand years. The intricate carvings on medieval cathedrals fade and blur with each passing century. Even granite, one of the hardest natural stones, eventually succumbs to the chemistry of acid rain and the relentless expansion and contraction caused by temperature changes. Now imagine these same forces acting not over centuries or millennia, but over hundreds of thousands or millions of years. Any surface structure, no matter how massive or well built, would eventually be reduced to rubble then dust, then scattered atoms mixed indistinguishably with the soil. But weathering is just the beginning of Earth's forgetting process. Beneath our feet, the planet is in constant motion. Tectonic plates drift across the surface at speeds measured in centimeters per year, carrying continents on journeys that span hundreds of millions of years. When plates collide, they create mountain ranges that thrust ancient seafloors into the sky. When they separate, they open new ocean basins that swallow entire regions. The process of subduction is perhaps the most dramatic example of geological forgetting. Along the edges of tectonic plates, oceanic crust is pulled down into the Earth's mantle, where it melts and is recycled into new rock. This means that the ocean floor, where we might expect to find evidence of ancient coastal civilizations, is constantly being renewed. The average age of oceanic crust is only about 200 million years, which sounds ancient until you realize that Earth itself is over 4.5 billion years old. In practical terms, this means that most of the ocean floor has been completely replaced multiple times throughout Earth's history. Any evidence of ancient civilizations that might have existed on now submerged continental shelves could have been dragged down into the mantle and melted into magma, erasing not just the structures themselves, but the very ground they stood on. Volcanic activity adds another layer to the planet's forgetting process. When volcanoes erupt, they don't just destroy what exists on the surface, they bury it under layers of ash and lava that can preserve some materials while completely obliterating others. The ancient Roman cities of Pompeii and Herculaneum were preserved by volcanic ash, giving us remarkable insights into daily life in the 1st century CE. But for every Pompeii that gets preserved, countless other sites are simply destroyed by volcanic activity. Over geological timescales, volcanic regions are constantly being resurfaced. The Columbia River basalts in the northwestern United States represent a series of lava flows that covered an area larger than most countries, burying whatever landscapes existed there before under hundreds of feet of solid rock. Similar volcanic events occur regularly throughout Earth's history, each one potentially erasing entire regions from the archaeological record. Glaciation presents another mechanism for planetary forgetting. During ice ages, massive glaciers advance across continents, grinding bedrock into powder and carrying away everything in their path. When the glaciers retreat, they leave behind completely transformed landscapes. The Great Lakes of North America were carved by glacial action, as were the fjords of Scandinavia and the valleys of the Swiss Alps. Any evidence of human habitation in these regions prior to the last ice age would have been scraped away and scattered across vast areas as glacial debris. The advancing ice wouldn't just bury structures, it would pulverize them and mix the fragments with millions of tons of rock and soil. Even more subtle processes contribute to the planet's forgetting. Soil formation and sedimentation gradually bury surface features under layers of organic matter and wind-blown particles. Rivers change their courses, depositing new sediments in some areas while eroding others. Chemical weathering slowly dissolves even the most durable materials, breaking them down at the molecular level. The cumulative effect of all these processes is that Earth's surface is constantly being renewed, recycled, and transformed. What we see today is not a static record of the past, but a dynamic system that preserves only tiny fragments of its own history. This has profound implications for archaeology and our understanding of ancient civilizations. The archaeological record isn't a complete library of human history. It's more like a few scattered pages that happen to survive the destruction of countless volumes. Most of what humans have built, created, and achieved throughout our time on Earth has left no permanent trace whatsoever. And this is just considering the natural processes of geological change. When we add in the effects of catastrophic events, cosmic impacts, massive volcanic eruptions, rapid climate shifts, the picture becomes even more sobering. A single large asteroid impact or supervolcanic eruption could erase not just individual civilizations, but entire continents' worth of archaeological evidence. The Chicxulub impact that ended the age of dinosaurs 66 million years ago left a crater 180 kilometers wide and caused environmental changes that persisted for thousands of years. If a similar impact occurred today, it wouldn't just destroy current human civilization, it would erase most traces that we had ever existed at all. Future archaeologists, if they existed, might find a thin layer of unusual sediment containing scattered metallic fragments, but they would have no way of reconstructing the complexity of the society that had been destroyed. This brings us to a crucial realization. The absence of evidence is not necessarily evidence of absence. Just because we haven't found clear traces of advanced prehistoric civilizations doesn't mean they never existed. It might simply mean that Earth's natural forgetting processes have been thorough in erasing the evidence. The statistical reality is sobering. If we assume that civilizations tend to build their major cities near coastlines for access to trade routes and resources, and if sea levels have risen hundreds of feet since the last ice age, then most evidence of prehistoric coastal civilizations would now be underwater. And if those underwater sites are located on oceanic crust that gets recycled through subduction, then the evidence could be not just submerged, but completely destroyed. Even evidence that survives on stable continental crust faces the constant assault of weathering, sedimentation, and geological activity. The older the potential evidence, the more likely it is to have been altered, buried, or destroyed by natural processes. This doesn't mean we should abandon the search for evidence of lost civilizations, but it does mean we need to be realistic about what kinds of traces might survive over truly long time periods. Probably not cities or roads or monuments, possibly not even metal artifacts or organic remains. What might survive are subtle changes to local geology, unusual isotope ratios in sediments, or patterns of mineral distribution that don't match natural processes. Ironically, the best preserved evidence of ancient life comes not from the most complex organisms, but from the simplest ones. Bacterial mats and primitive organisms have left traces in rocks that are billions of years old because they altered the chemistry of their environment in ways that became permanently locked into the geological record. If we want to find evidence of lost civilizations, we might need to look not for their buildings or tools, but for their chemical signatures. Changes to atmospheric composition, alterations to soil chemistry, or modifications to local ecosystems that persisted long after the civilizations themselves had vanished. This perspective transforms the search for lost civilizations from archaeology into a kind of forensic geology. Instead of looking for artifacts, we might need to look for disruptions in natural patterns, anomalies in chemical compositions, or changes to geological processes that could indicate the presence of technological activity in the distant past. The challenge is that nature itself is quite capable of producing unusual chemical signatures and geological anomalies. Volcanic activity, meteor impacts, unusual weather patterns, and biological processes can all create chemical traces that might be mistaken for evidence of technological activity. Distinguishing between natural anomalies and potential evidence of lost civilizations requires extremely careful analysis and multiple lines of supporting evidence. As we continue our journey through these possibilities tonight, we're beginning to understand that the question of lost civilizations isn't just about archaeology or history, it's about the nature of time itself, the persistence of memory, and the fragility of all human achievements in the face of planetary forces that operate on scales almost too vast to comprehend. The Earth beneath our feet is not a static foundation, but a dynamic system that constantly recreates itself. We live on a planet that forgets, and understanding this forgetting might be the key to appreciating both what we might have lost and what we're in danger of losing still. As we drift deeper into this exploration of lost possibilities, we encounter something that might be even more intriguing than physical artifacts or underwater ruins. We find patterns, recurring themes that appear across cultures and continents with such consistency that they seem to echo from some shared human memory, some collective experience that reaches back far beyond recorded history. These aren't the grand monuments or technological achievements we've been examining. They're subtler traces woven into the fabric of human storytelling, mythology, and cultural memory. They appear as flood narratives that span the globe, as architectural principles that emerge independently in widely separated civilizations, and as technological innovations that seem to arise and disappear with puzzling regularity throughout human history. Consider the remarkable consistency of flood myths across human cultures. From the biblical account of Noah's Ark to the Mesopotamian epic of Gilgamesh, from Hindu traditions of cosmic deluges to Native American stories of world-cleansing waters, nearly every human culture preserves some narrative of a great flood that destroyed a previous world. The details vary, but the core elements remain surprisingly consistent. A warning comes to a chosen few. They preserve themselves and representatives of life in some form of vessel or protected space. The flood destroys most of civilization and returns the world to a more primitive state. The survivors become the ancestors of the current human population. Traditional scholarship has typically explained these similarities as either coincidence or cultural diffusion, stories spreading from culture to culture through trade and migration. But the distribution of flood narratives is so widespread and the similarities so striking that some researchers have begun to wonder whether these stories might preserve actual memories of catastrophic events that affected early human populations globally. The end of the last ice age did indeed involve massive flooding events, as glacial ice melted and sea levels rose hundreds of feet relatively quickly in geological terms. Coastal populations around the world would have experienced the gradual but relentless loss of their traditional territories to rising waters. Over generations, this ongoing displacement could easily have been preserved in cultural memory as stories of a great flood that destroyed the world of the ancestors. But the flood narratives often contain details that suggest more than gradual sea level rise. They describe sudden, catastrophic events that transform the world in a matter of days or weeks. This aligns more closely with the kind of rapid environmental changes that might result from cosmic impacts, massive volcanic eruptions, or other catastrophic events. The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis we explored earlier provides a potential mechanism for exactly the kind of global catastrophe described in flood myths. A cosmic impact large enough to trigger rapid climate change would also likely cause massive tsunamis, atmospheric disturbances, and environmental chaos that could reasonably be remembered as a world-destroying flood. If flood myths do preserve memories of actual events, they might also preserve memories of what was lost in those events. Many flood narratives describe the destroyed world as more advanced or more perfect than the current one. The antediluvian world is often portrayed as a golden age of knowledge, longevity, and direct communication with divine forces. These descriptions might represent mythological elaboration, the tendency of cultures to idealize the past, but they might also preserve memories of actual technological or cultural achievements that were lost during catastrophic events and never fully recovered. Beyond flood narratives, we find other patterns that suggest possible continuities from lost civilizations. Architectural principles appear and reappear across cultures in ways that seem to exceed what we would expect from independent development or cultural exchange. The use of megalithic construction techniques, for instance, appears in widely separated cultures with no known contact between them. The precise fitting of massive stone blocks without mortar, the use of complex interlocking systems, and the achievement of extraordinary precision in cutting and positioning stones are found in Peru, Easter Island, Lebanon, India, and other locations across the globe. While it's certainly possible that these techniques were developed independently multiple times, the similarities are sometimes so specific that they suggest either direct cultural transmission or inheritance from a common source. The problem is that conventional archaeological models don't provide clear mechanisms for such transmission across the vast distances and time periods involved. And so, as we reach the end of tonight's quiet journey through time and possibility, we find ourselves changed by the questions we've carried together. We've walked through underwater cities and stood among ancient stones that refuse to fit our timelines. We've examined artifacts that seem to whisper of knowledge lost and found again, and we've felt the weight of deep time itself, that great eraser that makes mysteries of mountains and legends of civilizations. Perhaps the most profound realization isn't whether we've found proof of lost civilizations, but rather how much mystery still surrounds us, how many stories Earth keeps locked away in layers of stone and sediment and silence. Whether we're the first conscious beings to contemplate the stars from this small blue world, or the latest in a long line of civilizations that have risen and fallen like waves upon an endless shore, we remain part of something magnificent and fragile and fleeting. The evidence we've explored tonight doesn't demand conclusions, it invites wonder, and maybe that's enough. Maybe the questions themselves are more valuable than any answers we might construct from fragments and shadows and the patient testimony of stones. For in asking these questions, in allowing ourselves to imagine deeper histories and older wisdoms, we honour both the mystery of our past and the precious uncertainty of our future. Sleep well, fellow travellers, knowing that beneath your dreams lie layers of time that hold secrets we may never fully uncover, and that's exactly as it should be.